Welcome everybody to our second in our series on future faculty diversity. Today's meeting will focus on the student and faculty retention. The first meeting we did, which I thought was very, very insightful and had good discussion, focused on the recruitment of students and faculty of color to the academy. And as all of you know, that's just the first step in this process is the recruitment. And then once the recruiting is done, of course, the challenge is making sure these institutions are doing what they need to do to keep the students and the faculty on board and engaged. We have three presenters with us today, and let me take a moment to introduce them. I'm not going to do a long introduction because you can read those for yourselves. But first we have Jai Jackson, Dr. Jai Jackson. He is the Director of Graduate Student Success within the College of Education at North Carolina State University. Welcome, Jai, and thank you very much for being with us today. We next have Dr. Veronica Martinez Acosta. She is Professor of Biology and Director of the Honors Program at the University of Incarnate Word in San Antonio, Texas. Veronica, good seeing you and welcome. And third panelist today is Dr. Christopher Witt. He is the Creighton University's inaugural Vice Provost for Institutional Diversity and Inclusion. Chris, welcome, and thank you all three of you very much for agreeing to be with us today and to add your input into the experiences at your institutions that you have had, the research you've done in terms of student and faculty diversity. We also have with us moderating today's session, Alan Richard. He is the SREB News Director, and he will lead the discussion. Alan, I'm turning it over to you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Abraham. Welcome, everybody. I'm just going to kind of keep us on track and help keep the conversation going. This is a conversation. These are not presentations. It's a discussion. So please join us. Add your question into the chat and speak up if you have a comment or question for the panels. And the central question today is really about retaining underrepresented faculty and graduate students. Helping them not only stay, but thrive. And the question is, what are you and your institutions and programs that you know about doing to invest in underrepresented faculty and graduate students? How can we make better environments, culture to help more of them succeed and be everything they should be in their institutions, in their communities, and in their academic disciplines? So I asked Dr. Witt in Omaha, Nebraska to kind of kick us off here because I know, Chris, that you focus a lot of your work on building the kind of culture and community that is important to help faculty and students thrive, graduate students thrive. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing at Creighton?
Well, I would say when it comes to this work, a lot of what we're doing are things that can be generalized to other settings. So being that we're a Catholic Jesuit institution, we spend a lot of time talking about reflection and discernment. And I would say in doing this work of really thinking about not only retaining folks, but having people really thrive as their full and authentic selves within departments, within colleges, schools, universities, that both individually as leaders, as well as more on a collective approach, that people would take the time to actually reflect on what it means to be a person from whatever identity group we're thinking of, or whatever identity groups aren't part of the majority, in order to really think about, reflect on what does it mean for a person from those backgrounds to navigate their way to our institution or program, and what does it mean for a person to really thrive as their full and authentic self in that space. And as we start to really then name or identify various challenges or ways in which it might not be easy, or it may be harder than it should be within the culture, within the space, then to really discern paths of action to say, well, what can we do to really change or transform systems and structures to make this a more welcoming place, a place where a person can be their full and authentic self. And lastly, we just go about acting on it. You're not going to be able to do everything at once, but at least do something and then repeat. And you continue to do this, and that's when you start to see a bit of a cultural shift. But if we think everything is a one-off and we could just have a program or an event and then we're done and we're going to wipe our hands of it, that's not the case when we're talking about broad systemic issues.
Great. Dr. Acosta in San Antonio, you want to get in here? I know that you do a lot of thinking about how every institution, even a minority serving institution like your own, can be doing better at supporting faculty, underrepresented, especially faculty of color and graduate students.
I echo a lot of the things that Dr. Witt so very nicely pointed out for us to get us started. The way I think of it is, we've had many years, as many of us have read and many of us have written about, of support to try to develop access to the academy for underrepresented individuals. But we've really failed at developing fully the environment that is needed to allow those individuals to thrive, which means that we have to remove the barriers in order to encourage retention of those individuals, but not just retention, also promotion through the institution so that we see them in the upper administrative levels. And so I think that for me, at a minority serving institution, a faith-based institution, we definitely have what I like to think of as a skeleton of that structure, where we have as a part of our mission to serve the underserved. But I think that we would become complacent if we didn't do our own reflection as minority serving institutions. And that's something that I would like to see us avoid, and have been one of the leaders of that discussion at my campus, recognizing that we do ourselves a disservice when we don't fully acknowledge the challenges and the barriers that we have on our campuses, and that we are in a position as a minority serving institution to do better. And I think those are the things that we try to focus on, is really fully reflecting, as Chris so nicely pointed out, but then also moving beyond that and actually putting into action our mission that we have at the institution.
And Alan, if I might just interject one quick point.
Please
I
do.
would say with everything that Veronica was saying, that we make sure that we're being as transparent and honest as possible. Far too often within our institutions, when we're talking about engaging in this work, we want to use the rose-colored glasses to look at what's working. And it is important to look at what's working, what has succeeded, but we also have to be brutally honest about what isn't working, how we got here, the roots of whatever disparities we may be seeing, so then we can be better for the future. And we just can't be afraid to have some of those conversations, because we'll actually build trust. We think that having those types of conversations of talking about what's not working is going to make people who might find themselves in a marginalized circumstance want to leave, when in actuality, in most cases, it's refreshing. People say, well, hey, things aren't perfect here, but they're owning up to the issues and they're trying to be better. Well, maybe I'll go ahead and hang on for a little while and try to help see this through, versus knowing things aren't working, knowing there's marginalization, and saying, well, looking only at the good. Well, then the person says, well, I'm not seen. I'm not recognized. My pain is not real. It's not, well, it's real, but it's not recognized. So we just have to be very careful about being open, honest, and transparent as we go through whichever process we choose to engage.
And I hope all of you panelists will just join in so that I can totally get out of the way. But Dr. Jai Jackson at NC State, add to this discussion. You do a lot of thinking about the culture as well of your institution and how to shape your graduate program at State.
Yeah, absolutely. So here and at a number of institutions, but here specifically at NC State, we focus on the onboarding of our graduate students. We acknowledge that if we're bringing graduate students in and we understand that we want to build them into faculty, future faculty who are going to be contributing and building the academy, that we have to treat them as if they're our colleagues from day one. Instead of creating this mindset that they are beneath or subjugated, we have to treat them as if they are one of the team. So we do this, and in part it helps us to minimize that effective imposter syndrome on our various faculty, our future faculty, and our graduate students. Additionally, it's building the culture of appreciation, but also thinking back to understanding truly where the students are, understanding who they are as individuals. And as Dr. Witt mentioned, we have to be transparent. We have to be transparent and acknowledge where we've had our missteps, what we're doing to improve on those, and then also making sure that we're having shared governance and moving forward. In order to move onward and upward, we have to make sure that the individuals that we are trying to affect and to benefit are a part of the conversation, they're a part of the team, they're a part of the envisioning. So we have to make sure that it is shared momentum and a shared duty amongst all individuals.
Looks like we've already got a question from a graduate student at the University of Georgia. And I want to make sure I get Miss Adams' name correct. Veronica, do you know how to pronounce Miss Adams' first name? Or Miss Adams, you can just pipe in if you'd like. But I'll repeat your question. Miss Adams at the University of Georgia asks the following: Black women have a particularly distinct experience as faculty. What are some of the ways to combat the multitude of systems of oppression that Black women encounter within the academy, such as sexism, racism, and heterosexism, without being outcast or blackballed?
Once again, I think having some real open honesty. Far too often, particularly even within the diversity inclusion space, we'll have discussions and we'll say, well, we'll hear people say, this is a woman's issue. And then they'll say, well, we have Black issues, and oh, we have LGBT issues. And I'm always the one to say, well, what might it be like if you have a Black LGBT, woman involved in that? And then people are kind of taken aback. If you're talking about white women, name it. If you're talking about, Black people in general, name it. If you're talking about Black women, name it. If you're talking about Black LGBT folks and their challenges, name it. And I think in really naming these things, identifying these things, and steering colleagues away from these dangerous groupings of individuals or the erasure of people's full identities, not allowing them to really represent as their full and authentic selves, will do better. And I think that's not a solution for the problems that are faced by, Black women or Black LGBT women, as was put in the question, but I think it's a great first step, because we can't even get to addressing individuals' issues found at an intersection if we don't recognize and actually honor the fact that the intersections exist.
And I think that speaks, very much to the fact that the leadership has to have that understanding. I mean, clearly, Dr. Witt has that understanding as a leader at his institution at the administrative level, he can lead that conversation and really guide the conversation so that those identities are recognized and so that the voices are heard. I think in that way, at my institution, I've tried to serve as a person who is at a level of full professor so that I'm able to listen and help to navigate when I do have a colleague who perhaps is not yet promoted through the system and doesn't feel comfortable or doesn't know how to navigate it. But we need more leaders at the administrative level that perhaps, if they don't have the training, receive training on how these different cultures and traditions may have specific needs that are not being addressed.
And I would go a step further and to say that within our institutions, we have to be supportive at the administrative level and at all levels of the institution of affinity groups to support our faculty who feel like they are being marginalized or feel that they're underrepresented. These affinity groups provide this sense of belonging and this sense of support And also it helps individuals, especially new faculty and graduate students, it helps them to become further acculturated to the institution. Um, and I really want to say specifically that they need to be supported at the administrative and university levels, because without recognition of these specific groups that are there to support these marginalized populations, then we, as Dr. Witt said, we are siloing them. We're silencing their voices and we're silencing their identities. And oftentimes institutions will say, well, we don't have a big population of this, so therefore we can't support that. And that's not the case. We have to support all of our individuals, no matter what their identities are, and no matter where those intersections may meet. My favorite saying, of course, is we have to treat the various cultures on campus as if they are gumbo. And coming from Louisiana State University, I'm a big fan of my Louisiana cooking. And with every gumbo, every ingredient, every culture in this analogy adds something to the stew, adds something to the pot, and not one thing supersedes another. So we have to treat it like a gumbo and know that everything exists independently within the greater community, the greater family of the institution. So every group deserves to have some type of support, deserves to have some type of recognition, deserves to be known and appreciated on campus.
And I think with every conversation, not every conversation, but we shouldn't aim to have every conversation that's focused on people who find themselves minoritized within that setting at that university be all about the challenges, all about disparities. We also need to open the door to talk about the various ways in which being part of whatever particular identity group or groups one might belong is uplifting. And that's where the affinity groups come in. That's where reminding people of ways in which they can build networks and community can really be strong. In my previous life, I had a life as a political science professor and a department chair and all of that. And in my career as a political scientist, which is a very white, male-dominated academic field, I actually was able to really grow and rise in great part through it really embracing the other folks who found themselves in that minoritized space within our discipline. So really embracing and engaging with the National Conference of Black Political Scientists, of really engaging and being embraced by colleagues within that space. And really, I was at an institution that was a majority white institution, but they valued the fact that I was succeeding in that space. They valued the fact that I was bringing that space to our institution, and I was creating space for opportunities within that organization and within the minoritized space within political science for our students of color and all of those things. So that helped me to move through the tenure and promotion process. If I would have found myself at another institution that had no regard for those spaces, that had no regard for that work, that had no regard for the work that I did on Black politics, then my career could have stagnated. And then they would have lost somebody who had a lot to offer. So we have to remember at our institutions that there also are moments to really celebrate those spaces where it might not be a whole lot of people, but they may be small groups, but they're mighty groups. And really to have that balance that, hey, we're going to talk about challenges and how to overcome those challenges, but also how can your identity be one of the strongest parts of your portfolio moving forward in your career?
And Dr. Witt, I got to jump in on what you said by saying competition. Within our academic departments, within our colleges, oftentimes we push this mentality that we're competing as faculty colleagues, as graduate students, and then that creates this dog eat dog mentality, whereas in reality, it should be the success of my colleague is my success. The success of us all is the university's success. So if my colleague, Dr. Witt, Dr. Martinez Acosta is doing well, if they're succeeding, I'm succeeding because they're furthering the name of the institution, which helps me. So we have to take down and tear down these walls of pushing this false sense of competition. There are no limits to the number of PhDs that can be awarded by an institution. There are no limits to the number of tenured promotions that can be awarded at institutions. So why are we pushing faculty, specifically faculty of color, why are we pushing faculty period to say that, to make them think that they're competing with the person next to them?
I think some of that, just to kind of chime in here a little bit based on what both of you are saying, a lot of that stems from the established culture of academia. That was something that was established long ago, this idea that we are competing with each other. And there wasn't, at those particular times, there wasn't a consideration of this idea of celebrating different cultures because there was one. And so we often see at many institutions, this implied assimilation that individuals feel very pressured, either with implicitly or explicitly, that they have to become a part of the norm. And that's not, that flies against, when you think about it, the idea of what the academy really wants to uphold, and that is to develop thinkers and to develop innovation at an institution, right? For these institutions to be leaders of change. And so that shouldn't be any different when it comes to this change within the academy that needs to take place, so that we no longer have those gatekeepers and established academic cultures that do provide barriers.
I want to get to promotion and tenure, of course, which has already come up a couple of times. But on this note, there's a question that's just come directly to me from Maurice Williams at Clemson University. He's asking Dr. Jackson, how does the shared governance you mentioned look in practice? In what ways are graduate students engaged in shared responsibility with faculty that makes them feel like a member of the team as they prepare to be faculty members?
This really starts with our institutions. It pains me when I see a committee that is charged with supporting graduate students or supporting underrepresented graduate students or diversity, and the committee is made up of majority faculty who don't represent the graduate students, who don't look like the graduate students, who aren't there necessarily engaging with them, or staff who have nothing to do with the students. I feel when we have committees and we put together these shared governance structures, it should be 50% students if it has something to do with students. If it has something to do with the institution, we need to make sure that the individuals who are affected mostly by these have an equal, if not greater, footing. So in putting together these shared governance, we need to make sure that the students have a voice, and not just a voice at the end after we've developed the policy and ran it through 16 different levels, but a voice at the beginning, the middle, and the end, and that they have an opportunity to continuously voice their opinions, and that their opinions are going to be heard, and not at a one-off town hall, because as Dr. Witt mentioned earlier, oftentimes we have these one-offs. Students are feeling this way. Let's have this one-off town hall. Okay, we heard you. All right, you can go back, do your homework. We'll see you in a couple of years. We need to have constant opportunities for students to talk, to lead, and to have actual influence. And then we need to highlight those opportunities and highlight the progress that we've made, and highlight that we do take student voices serious. And here's how we are actually manifesting what our students are asking for and how we're translating that into actions put forth. Oftentimes we hide these, or we stick a couple of students on a committee just for the sake of saying, oh, we have a representative body of students, faculty, and staff. When in reality, our students are there as a placeholder. They're there as a checkbox. We have to do better. If you want student voice, honestly, it boils down to we have to remember why we're here. We're in higher education to educate and to help individuals grow. And without the voice and the impact and input of students, we become so disconnected from the populations that we are charged with serving and educating that we become no better than the individuals who are in positions of power making rules, regulations, and policies for populations in which they have no representation of.
But I think that reminds me too that we have to remember that in this day and age with social media, many students are actually paying attention to what universities are doing and what they are saying. And they're beginning to ask the question, I'm interested in coming to this university to carry out my graduate work, but what are you doing to provide the space that I need and that I want to be successful?
And I think we also have to recognize that if it's going to be students, faculty, whomever else is part of our space, that their lives don't only exist within the space of the university. That, we have to be able to recognize, celebrate, and support ways in which individuals, either individually or collectively, engage with the rest of the world. Far too often, if we're talking about injustice, we'll say, well, yeah, injustice is bad. And then we have this big barrier between, hey, we're going to focus on injustices over there, and then we'll turn a blind eye to the ones here. Or if we talk about injustices or problems within the institution, we can't have any connection to things that are outside, where it's like, yeah, the sexism that's found in the society, it bubbles up within our university. The racism found in the university matches a lot of what people have experienced outside of the university. So I think if we start to have a little bit more of an open approach to how we support and engage in that space, it will really help us to move forward. And I also think, to go along with some of the comments we've just heard, if we look at periods of change more as opportunities to add voice, we start to shift our culture more than only looking for spaces where we can say we're taking a moment to add voice. And what I mean by that is, it's one thing to have, a student task force on campus culture, or it's one thing, or to have faculty task force or focus group on what faculty members feel should be in the next round of tenure processes or something. But how about when you're actually doing a climate survey at the institution and developing the tool that you have students and other people at the table, as opposed to simply telling us what you want, then we'll go take it and we'll take it from here, like actually be part of the process. Or how about when a school is searching for a new dean or something of that nature, that you actually use that as an opportunity to say, well, how in the past have we not had as many voices at the table? How can we change our process? Because each dean search, it's so big, it's so impactful. The search never looks exactly, or it shouldn't look exactly like the search from the previous dean or whatever. Those are moments where you can really change something. Who's at the table, what type of voice that they have. And when people see those high profile changes and engagement, they're a little bit more encouraged and more open-minded to changes at other levels across the university. So look at those as opportunities versus only having those one-offs.
So I was asked if I could provide just a more tangible example of shared faculty-student governance. And in my experience recently, I've been reached out to and talked to a few different departments here at NC State, where they're going through and looking at all of their curriculum for some of these programs and making sure that their curriculum is culturally responsive and culturally engaging. And instead of it just being faculty, the committee is comprised majority of students, graduate students, because they're the ones taking the class. They're the ones who are pulling the information. And also, a couple of these departments acknowledged that we are not the pros. We don't know exactly how to do this in an appropriate manner that is going to be equitable and truly impactful for the students that we're teaching. And I think that's an amazing example, because they're saying this is for the students. So we need to make sure the students have the ultimate voice in this. And the faculty are extremely receptive to this, to say that, you're helping us out by giving us the advising of how we can do this and how we can do this the right way, instead of how we can do this in the way that we think, which has good intention, but potentially horrible execution.
Dr. Martinez Acosta, you were just saying in the chat that grant agencies are taking notice when underrepresented minority students are not getting the support and strong mentorship they need. Can you say more about that?
Yes, I can. So I've served on review panels for different grant initiatives that support students from underrepresented groups. And it's very clear from particularly NSF and NIH that if you are a principal investigator that has not successfully graduated and supported your underrepresented students, that you are not going to be receiving funding from these institutions. And this was something that was reported on a few years back, and I've seen it in action. And that, I was concerned that this is something that was just a statement, but I've actually seen it on panel. So, it is noted when the individual isn't providing that support. And so I think it's starting to at least have that effect. I was going to echo just real briefly on what was just said. Here I'm in an undergraduate position. I do mentor graduate students through other agencies, but we've taken the same approach with our undergraduates, and we have asked for them to serve on an advisory board to do just that, to address the inclusivity of our curriculum and ask them, what are we doing that's working, but what are we not doing? What are we missing the mark on?
Well, and on that topic, we got some good questions coming in here. There's a question from John David about, how willing institutions, departments, and colleges, how willing they are to be transparent about these issues. And Dr. Jackson, you mentioned social media and the chat, as a way to kind of have that back and forth. What does that really look like, though? And are a lot of institutions and departments really willing to take that risk?
Well, as we know,
I believe it's John David Rocha, by the way.
as we know in
Sorry if I
higher
got you.
education, we're risk adverse. Like, we do not want to take any unnecessary risk because we have to make sure that we exist today, tomorrow, and in the future for our institutions. And so with a lot of departments, you're not going to have individuals that openly just come out and say, here are the things that we're doing wrong, and here's the data to prove that we did it wrong, without there first being a recognition of that data internally, and then an institution of a program, a service, or support to fix that. And then afterwards to say, this is what we did wrong, this is how we acknowledge it, and this is how we fixed it, or this is how we are fixing it now. But with the social media push, one of the strongest weapons, one of the strongest tools that we have is social media, because we control that as individuals. And as future students, undergrad and graduate, we see that there's greater engagement. And with these generations of students that are coming into the academy, they place more value in the opinions of their peers than they do on the rankings in this magazine that this generation doesn't pick up, and this newspaper that this generation doesn't read. So my best recruiting tool of graduate students is social media. When they post on our Facebook page, when they post on our Instagram, our Twitter, we acknowledge them, we talk to them. And then we know that our biggest means are our current students. If our students are on Twitter saying that they had a horrible experience in this class because of a lack of cultural responsiveness, then we have to engage that, because now the court of public opinion is there, and it takes one retweet and then it can circle social media, and that will hurt our ability to recruit. So we have to be very intentional about engaging, acknowledging our missteps, and being very quick on them. Because 30, 40 years ago, something happened, it might have been months before it became public knowledge. But now we all get the Inside Higher Education emails every morning, and that news is fresh off the press. So we can't afford to ignore this population and the mediums that they use, because social media is truly that court of public opinion. And it is also, it's there, it's not going anywhere.
Right. I think to say nothing, to be silent, is death for an institution or a department. I absolutely, there's care taken when we think about, how is this going to affect us going forward? But to not do something it speaks volumes. And I think that that's something that we've seen and has come about in social media with the Black Lives Matter statements that many institutions released. And now we're all being called upon. You release these statements. What are you doing? We want to see what you're doing. And so you have to address it, in some way so that the transparency is there.
And I think with talking about statements and other things of that nature, and talking about social media kind of on that ground level, that we also have to think about the strategy that goes into really getting the president of the institution or the chancellor to say certain things, the provost, the deans. So if you want to see some change, obviously you have things bubble up from the ground level, but speaking as a senior administrator who sits in the cabinet meetings, does all these things, there's something to be said to moving the people who are the most visible, the people who have the decision-making power. Now, once you get them to commit through statements, through tweets, through things on website, whatever else, a lot of times then there's this push of, well, what are they going to do to act? Well, that's where folks who are on the ground then have to look at that as a leverage point to say, well, now that the president of the university has come out and said, well, we want to strive to move towards being an anti-racist institution. Well, now if you as a graduate student or a untenured faculty member start to make statements and take action as an anti-racist, or say that, yes, our institution needs to do that, and your department chair or somebody else has an issue with that, now you have a leverage point. Oh, you have an issue with what the president said, or you had an issue with what was put out by university communications on the website and all of those spaces. And on the flip side, you also have leverage against the university, where now instead of you being a total outsider and saying, well, this is what the university needs to do, you're at a leverage point to say, well, the university said they were committed to this. I am protesting, writing this email, organizing people, not because I'm working against the university, because I'm working with the university to achieve what it said it wanted to achieve as its goal. So a lot of these things is it's a very fine line on perception, but know just how much leverage you can accumulate by convincing people in those moments, even if it's that moment of this past summer where everybody wants to say something, well, now hold us to it. We've said it, hold us to it, and also know that now you've gotten a bit of a clearing in space if you're willing to kind of go to the mat for some certain things. So it's definitely in those moments, there's a lot to be said for that senior leadership.
So what about translating that into adding more faculty of different perspectives and experiences and backgrounds and more administrators? And so that gets into demystifying tenure and promotion paths and onboarding, I suppose, for graduate students and faculty members. What about those things?
So for new faculty, for underrepresented faculty, and graduate students as a whole, we have to talk about onboarding, because oftentimes we bring these students and these new faculty into an environment that it's brand new. For many, they may be first generation students. For many, this may be the first foray into academia that they've ever even considered. So when we bring them into these areas and we expect them to hit the ground running on August 1st, without giving them proper onboarding, we're doing a disservice to these individuals. I'm a firm believer that your onboarding for new faculty, your onboarding for new students, graduate or undergraduate, starts the moment they accept an offer of a job or for admissions. We have to bring them in, we have to acculturate them to the institution, we have to get them the information and the know-how. That way, when they get to the institution, they're not struggling to navigate the intricacies of higher education and academia. For new faculty, we have to demystify the tenure process. It is so confusing for a new faculty member to come in, especially with this sense of competition. Who can I go to? Who can I talk to? Who can I trust to help me navigate this? Who's going to be my mentor at this institution? Because tenure is different everywhere, as we know. So we have to demystify this, and we have to let folks know in the beginning, before they even get to campus, here's the process for tenure. Here's what is expected of you, because that shouldn't change.
And I think it also speaks to mentorship at every level. There's a need, I think, particularly for faculty postdoctoral level or moving from graduate level, postdoctoral level into the faculty to have support from organizations like SREB or others within the discipline that actually, have as their leaders individuals who are URM who have navigated the system and who have made it. So you have these areas where you can feel safe as a junior faculty and come and find that support that you need, but also find how to use that leverage that Chris was talking about, and how to take note of those moments that you get, because sometimes they're only moments to actually utilize that leverage and say, I am here and this is what I need in order to be retained and be successful.
And I think a lot of it is making sure that you're engaging in really standing relationships, not simply saying, oh, for the first time in 10 years, we're bringing in, a graduate student of color or a faculty member of color. Oh, I guess we better, blow the dust off of these different documents for the professional organizations within our discipline that focus on people from underrepresented groups. Or maybe we should check into seeing what part of town do those folks live in. Let's drive through and see what's available and all of those things. No, if you really want to be a welcoming and inclusive place, you really want to be intentional about your inclusivity, then those need to be standing relationships. It needs to be standing interest in the scholarship in those areas, in the professional organizations, connections with institutions that might be producing folks from a wide variety of backgrounds who could work within the institution. And then every time you have an opening, you're looking to tap into those relationships. And then when somebody finally does come, you don't stop there. You show them that there's hope for the future, that you're staying connected, that you actually respect their existence, their identity, their potential work, all of those different types of things. That's so very important because far too often as a chief diversity officer, I will get contacted the week before an ad is going out. Hey, we want to think about diversity. The ad's already, it's going to be hitting the market in a few days. What you got? And I'm like, well, what have you been doing for the last few years? What relationships do you have in our broader community? What relationships do you have? Oh, well, we didn't think about that. I said, well, maybe you need to think, maybe we should be talking about your next search because this search is already, I can help you in the moment, but I can give you real help for the next upcoming searches. And we talk about searches just because, they're so vital to not only getting people in the door, but retaining folks once they're there. If you bring me in and let's say that you've lucked up, or let's say that you put some effort into really being intentionally inclusive in your search, and then I accept the offer, and then I get there and every search I see after that, you're resting on your laurels. We brought in a person of color. We don't need to do that stuff again. How long am I going to stay? How satisfied am I going to be? Do I really feel that you value me, that you're not even trying to create a critical mass of folks around me? So we have to remember that those two things are always in relationship, the search processes and intentionality and the whole idea of trying to retain folks.
I think also, though, that begs the need to be certain that there are people at the institution. And I say people, I've moved some policy through Faculty Senate, which I feel at least, getting more faculty behind myself is usually helpful. But the idea that we're not just going to bring somebody to campus and then do nothing, right? That individual is just a hire, but they're just a hire to say that we hired someone that was an underrepresented individual. And so that doesn't really, they're not capable of doing what they were hired to do if we don't affect policy change. And so at the same time, I think that it's important for institutions, either at the faculty level or at the administrative level or both, to start to talk about what those changes would look like, changes in hiring practices, making policy regarding tenure promotion that are clear, crystal clear, and to everyone, not just to certain individuals that know how that works, right?
Sounds like building a community, building a system as well, because also you don't want to be, I guess, in the unenviable position that maybe some of you have been in, where sort of all this responsibility hangs on you as the new faculty member, or, standing out for gender in a field, or racial ethnic background in a certain discipline or something like that. That must be a heavy load to carry too.
So can I also throw in there that it's important to talk to faculty, to talk to your underrepresented faculty and ask them candidly, maybe in an anonymous survey, because sometimes if you're untenured, you are not comfortable necessarily telling your dean or department head that things aren't great. But talk to your faculty and ask them ask them 3 questions. Why did we get you here? How did we get you here? What motivated you to come here? What are we doing well? And what could we be doing better? And take that data to heart, because then you're getting it straight from the individuals who you're trying to recruit and to retain. And then it also gives you an opportunity to understand I take it as a Wizard of Oz moment, where you get to pull back that curtain and these underrepresented faculty are going to tell you things that they see that you're potentially not aware of. They're going to tell you about the conscious and unconscious incidents that take place on campus or around the department. They're going to tell you about the information that they have or the lack of transparency or collegiality that may exist. So take this and actually put forth, as Dr. Martinez-Acosta said, talk about policies that you can move and legislation through Faculty Senate in order to create transparency, in order to create greater support for these individuals, and in order to remove the barriers, either real or fictitious, from the success of these individuals.
And I
Oh,
would
we got a
also say,
question. I'm sorry.
this-
I'm sorry,
this-
Chris.
this
Let me
a re-
interrupt you for 1 second. We just got a question, and we can continue this. But for Dr. Martinez Acosta, Corrine Castro asks, what policy change did your faculty senate pass that was related to faculty retention?
Well, so primarily we were focusing on our hiring policies, and that, well, twofold. So we focused on our hiring policies so that we could actually have as a part of our process a more explicit focus on making sure that we were doing everything possible to recruit diverse individuals each and every time, and not just for faculty positions, but also, especially more so, for the administrative positions where we lack that diversity. The other area that we pushed forward was looking at creating spaces and process. And this is the part that's been a little bit more tricky because it's a challenge. There's a little bit of fear involved, but to create a process where both student and faculty are capable to bring forward a concern and that something actually happens with that concern. We just hired a diversity officer, but there was a suggestion by one of our faculty that we needed to have something that was more secure and something that was anonymous, instead of having that individual who may not have tenure go to see the diversity officer, or send an email or call, because there was that level of fear as they were not tenured. And so we are working on that process through Senate.
And back to Dr. Witt, I know, because I want you to finish your thought, but by way of that, let me introduce another question that we got about men. There are programs for women in certain disciplines and that sort of thing, and pipelines for getting more women involved in graduate education and certainly faculty positions. What can we do about the shortage of males that we have as well? And back to you. Sorry, maybe that you can weave that in.
Yeah, I will. I was just going to say, in line with the conversation that we've been having, this whole idea that, it's pretty hard to manage things that you can't measure, that haven't been measured at all. And I think when we talk about our processes, the whole idea that you're going to find data in a narrative. And if you're getting narratives from people, if you're, as was mentioned, talking to faculty members and graduate students of color and asking them about their process, asking them about how they navigated the process, how they've been treated. If you talk to, also don't forget to talk to people in the majority to find out, what is their impression, because you may see similarities, you may see differences. And at the same time, really talk to the people who are managing these processes, be it recruitment processes, tenure and promotion processes, whatever. And when you have that narrative information, that can help you shape how you're going to measure potential change, growth, within those areas of how you're recruiting, how you're helping people through the tenure process. So I just wanted to make sure that as we're talking about having these narratives, that then we're saying, well, all right, how can we document this? And then how can we look to see, well, has anything been done differently as we've started to implement whatever processes? Looping around to the idea of men, that really makes me think about my academic discipline. There's a lot of work that's done, and I really celebrate the particularly Black women in political science who have done a lot to support one another, done a lot to uplift one another, and it certainly was needed. But we also have issues when we talk about just graduation rates of Black men from undergrad degrees, and particularly in PhDs. And when you look at my academic discipline in political science, it's no different. And these are the types of conversations that we've had. How do you really kind of approach that subject, but do it carefully? Because you don't want to look as if you're undermining the very noble and needed efforts to really aim for gender equity, to really uplift women. You don't want to have it to look like, well, this is a men's rights, movement or something like that, but also addressing the reality that there are those disparities. And I think in that space, you really lead with the data. And you just say, well, if we are really equity minded, and we're really mindful of making sure that we're creating space and breaking down barriers, well, we want to have representation across the board, and we may have to approach things that way. I think you can't be you can't be overly simplistic. You have to be nuanced with it. Whereas when you're trying to uplift women, because we all have a certain level of understanding of the challenges faced by women and the disparities, then everybody's on board, let's go for it. Let's do it and it's right. But when it comes to men in a particular circumstance, men of color, we have to really explain what we're doing and show how it's going to play out in the whole. But it needs to be done, but it needs to be done carefully.
We've got 9 more minutes, and so I just wanted to mention that the more questions are welcome. We've had some really good ones already, but please type it into chat. You can also let us know if you have a question, and we can unmute you, and you can just speak up. But as we transition to that, I just wanted to mention over in the chat, Veronica Johnson with SREB has posted a new SREB publication, which is kind of a guide on how to focus on faculty diversity and why it's so important. And Veronica planned this webinar, and she's amazing. And also Hannah from SREB is on this webinar, and she wrote that publication. So I just wanted to mention that. Looks like Dana Harmon has mentioned that seconded the comment about men. In social work faculty, there's a problem with recruiting men. And saw the same in the doctoral study. Go ahead, Jess.
If I may, I'm in the College of Education, and we have a hard time recruiting males who want to be teachers. And oftentimes we think back, I go to my male teachers who are pursuing advanced degrees and ask why. What motivated you to want to pursue this after the stigma that only women are teachers, and they say, it's their passion, or that they had an influential male teacher or female teacher who told them that they could do it. So essentially it's breaking this stigma that's associated with the gendering of disciplines. Like, we have to go back to these disciplines to say that this is not a male only, this is not a woman only, this is not, we have to control that in our messaging. We have to control that in our imagery, because if I have a website that has nothing but women teaching students, all of our stories are focused on that. This is the imagery that we're sending forward. So we have to, and it seems so small, but yet it has such a major impact, in that we have to control our imaging, we have to control our messaging, our word usage, we have to control the things that we do. And also, institutions have to do better with training your faculty. Your faculty, your staff, anyone who represents your university is a recruiter for your university. When they go to conferences, when they go to Target and they're shopping and they have a College of Education t-shirt on, they are representing and recruiting for our institution. They're representing and recruiting students, faculty, and staff. So within our college, within our institution, we push everyone to go through unconscious and conscious bias training. If you're going to sit on a search committee or be a recruiter or look at applications, you need to go through that training, because the way that you act and the way you carry yourself, the way that you use your words when you're wearing anything that says our institution's name, people are going to associate that with the whole and entirety of the institution. So we have to make sure that the way that we talk to prospective students, whether they come to my program or someone else's, is one that encourages all to apply, lets everyone know that they're welcome, that they will be valued, they will be appreciated, and we will do our best to graduate them.
I also want to add to that. I think that, it's the little things that really do matter, as you pointed out. And so I can't speak loudly enough about the fact that we all must think about the speakers that we invite to our institutions. That is the smallest thing that you could do to just, show light on, here is somebody that, you can see that that they've made it in this particular discipline, and that's someone that you can network with maybe after the talk as a graduate student. I've also invited, in this time period of Zoom, I've also invited people into my classroom from all over the country. And I've been very careful of inviting both men and underrepresented groups to speak to my students, so that they can actually see for themselves what is, attainable in this particular discipline.
There's a question from Dr. Angela Jackson, who's an African-American faculty member who loves teaching at her Christian university. But we're struggling with getting diverse faculty in our counseling program. Yet she's shared with predominantly white faculty that she sees white privilege. yeah, so
I would love,
go ahead.
I would love to say, first of all, Dr. Jackson, I would love to speak with you anytime. I feel that we might be kindred spirits. I think that this is something that all institutions really have to think about. The fact that our institutions were structured long ago during times of, time periods where individuals who are colored were not allowed to be in these spaces. And so I think that there's a lack of understanding. It's that permeates through all institutions, but it kind of goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning, that in these types of situations where you have a faith-based institution or you have a minority serving institution, there's this thought process of, oh, we're fine, we're good, we have this as our mission, we look at our diversity of students, but that's not that's not usually the place where we stop reflecting. We have to look at the whole piece. And I think that there is a struggle uh, present at these institutions, maybe more so than in some cases. I'm not sure that that's uh, truthful, but I think that it's something that it takes more effort to bring forward the images and the lessons and the stories to the predominantly white faculty or administrators at these institutions, so that they can start to recognize that that my reality is not your reality.
And one quick thing on faith-based institutions, I would definitely recommend that anyone at that type of institution learn, know, become one with the mission. And I mean, that's the case for any institution, but when we talk about these faith-based institutions, they are so tied to mission. And other institutions have mission, but utilize the language, the imagery, the commitment to that mission, utilize it in a way to really to celebrate diversity and inclusion. Well, hey, we're a Christian institution. We value each one of God's children, and they're each well. Then, hey, if everybody's God's children, how does that work into doing the work of diversity and inclusion? Shouldn't be at odds with that mission. You should figure out ways to say, well, I'm actually trying to accomplish this mission. Do you want to stand in the way? And I know each institution is at a different level, different ways of doing it, and there's different ways to approach it. But try your very best, if you're in that type of situation, to use that mission as a tool versus a barrier to progress in diversity and inclusion.
We're just about out of time, unfortunately. Veronica Johnson has posted a piece by Dr. Abraham that just was published, a guest column in Inside Higher Ed, that kind of sets out the argument for needing more underrepresented minority faculty, and gives some solutions to what institutions can proactively do. And there's been so many solutions and ideas and great thoughts mentioned on this call, on this webinar today. So thank you all so much. And I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Abraham and Veronica Johnson to wrap us up, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alan. I'd like to thank our committee folk for their just wonderful, insightful additions to the commentary of retaining students and faculty of color. You all did a great job of playing off one another's comments and keeping this conversation going. Obviously, there is a lot more of this conversation that we could keep going because there are a lot of elements to it. I would ask you all to share with us any ideas you have about future webinars that you would like to see or like to participate in. We're gonna be doing these at least monthly as we go forth into the future. And your ideas and your input and feedback on this would help guide us as we go forward. Again, I'd like to thank everybody for your time today, for being with us and for tuning in. Again, let me thank the panelists for their time and effort, and enjoyed listening to you. Some really interesting ideas and discussion. There's some takeaways from here. I'm going to end it there, turn it over to Veronica for any last moment comments, and otherwise I will dismiss us. Veronica?
Last comments basically are, if you don't mind filling out the survey, please do so. You'll find that in the chat. Also, if you think of additional questions or end up needing some additional information, please email us at doctoral.scholars@sreb.org.